Welcome to Mystery Cafe, your ultimate stop for gripping detective stories, chilling mysteries, and unforgettable investigations. Here, every video serves a fresh dose of suspense, shocking twists, and cases that challenge your inner detective. From classic whodunits to modern crime stories, we bring the world of mystery straight to your screen, where every clue matters and no secret stays buried for long. Before we start unraveling today's mystery, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa. Drop your country, city, or stay in the comments, and let's see how far the Mystery Cafe family reaches. Magnifying glass tilted right.
The Shadow in the Belfry. Chapter 1, The Quiet Village of Brambleford. The village of Brambleford rested beneath a soft blanket of morning mist, its cobbled streets damp with dew and the smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery. It was the sort of place where nothing ever seemed to happen, a fact that most of its inhabitants rather liked. Yet even the quietest corners of England can hold dark secrets, and on that particular spring morning, one of them was about to surface. Father Brown, the small, round-faced priest with eyes that saw far more than they should, walked slowly toward St. Agnes Church. His cassock brushed against the wet stone walls as he turned the corner by the vicarage. In one hand, he carried a worn umbrella, though the rain had already stopped. In the other, he held a small paper bag containing 2 rolls, breakfast, courtesy of Mrs. Merton, the baker's wife. He greeted each passerby with a nod, his manner mild and kind. But even as he smiled at young Tom, the altar boy, he noticed something unusual, a cluster of villagers standing near the churchyard gate. They whispered among themselves, their faces pale, their eyes darting toward the bell tower. "Good morning," Father Brown said gently as he approached. "You all look as though you've seen a ghost." Mr. Harper, the carpenter, cleared his throat. "It's not a ghost, Father, it's worse." "Worse than a ghost?" Father Brown's tone was mild, but his eyes sharpened. "Then I think I should have a look." The villagers parted as he walked past. The churchyard, normally a place of calm, felt heavy and cold. Crows circled overhead, crying harshly against the morning sky. When Father Brown reached the base of the bell tower, he saw the reason for their alarm. Lying at the bottom of the stone steps was the body of a man. His arms were bent at odd angles, his face turned upward, eyes open in silent surprise. He wore a caretaker's uniform, gray trousers, a vest, and a brass key ring that jingled faintly in the wind. Father Brown knelt beside him, setting down his umbrella. He pressed 2 fingers gently to the man's neck, though he already knew the truth. "Poor Mr. Lacey," murmured Mrs. Merton from behind. "He's been tending this church for 20 years. What could have happened?" Father Brown rose slowly, brushing the dust from his hands. "He fell, it seems." "That's what I thought," said Mr. Harper. "Until we saw the door to the belfry." The priest looked upward. The tower's wooden door stood slightly ajar, its lock broken clean through. Splinters hung from the frame like teeth. Father Brown frowned. "Who found him?" Tom, the altar boy, stepped forward. "I did, Father. I was coming early to polish the candles like you said. I saw him lying there and ran to get help." "You did the right thing, my boy." Inspector Mallory arrived a short while later, his polished boots thudding against the church path. He was a tall, lean man with a suspicious expression permanently fixed to his face. He tipped his hat curtly at Father Brown. "I should have known you'd be here," Mallory said. "Where there's a body, there's the priest." "Where there's a soul in trouble," Father Brown corrected quietly, "I usually find myself near." Mallory crouched beside the corpse, examining it briskly. Broken neck. No signs of struggle on the ground. Fell from the tower, no doubt. Father Brown looked thoughtful. Perhaps. Though it would be strange for a man like Mr. Lacey to climb the belfry before dawn. The inspector shot him a look. Strange, maybe. But people do strange things every day. Curiosity, perhaps. A loose beam, a bad step, accident, plain and simple. The priest tilted his head. Curiosity doesn't usually break locks. Mallory paused, frowning. You mean that door? Yes, Father Brown said softly. I've known Mr. Lacey for years. He always kept the keys with him. They climbed the narrow spiral staircase that wound up the inside of the bell tower. Dust motes swirled in the air, and the sound of their footsteps echoed off the stone. At the top, sunlight spilled through a cracked window, illuminating the great bronze bell that hung above them. A rope dangled from it, frayed at the end. Looks ordinary enough, Mallory muttered. Father Brown ran his fingers over the rope. Ordinary, yes. But this fraying, it's fresh. Someone cut it, quite recently. Cut it? Why would anyone do that? To stop the bell from ringing, Father Brown replied. Perhaps to muffle the sound while they were up here. Mallory sighed. You and your mysteries. Maybe Lacey was fixing the rope. Possibly, said the priest, but if that were so, why would he break his own lock to get in? The inspector had no answer. He looked out through the window instead. From the tower, the view of Brambleford spread below like a painting, green fields, neat cottages, smoke curling from chimneys. Peaceful. Perfect. Yet Father Brown's gaze lingered not on the beauty but on the shadows, the dark alley behind the inn, the narrow path that led to the woods, the smoke rising not from a chimney but from a small bonfire near the old rectory ruins. There, he said softly, pointing. Mallory squinted. What about it? I think, said Father Brown, that's where we'll find the other half of this story. The inspector sighed again. And what makes you so sure? Because, the priest replied, that's where guilt usually hides, in the place no one looks for it. As they descended, a clock struck 8, its chime echoing through the village. The mist was beginning to lift, revealing sunlight and the curious faces of more villagers gathering at the gate. Mrs. Merton crossed herself. Tom clung to her skirt. Father Brown stood for a moment at the churchyard gate, looking down once more at the motionless caretaker. May God grant him peace, he whispered. Father Brown stood for a moment at the churchyard gate, looking down once more at the motionless caretaker. May God grant him peace, he whispered. Then, turning to the inspector, he added softly, and may he help us find the truth, before it hides again. Chapter 2, The Fire by the Rectory. The path to the old rectory wound through fields damp with dew and bordered by low hedges. Father Brown and Inspector Mallory walked side by side, though the priest's short steps made the distance seem longer than it was. The smoke they had seen from the tower rose in a thin column ahead, drifting lazily against the pale sky. The old rectory had been abandoned for nearly 20 years, a blackened shell left standing after a lightning strike had set it ablaze. Brambleford's children told ghost stories about it, and even grown men crossed themselves when they passed it at night. Yet this morning, smoke once again curled from behind its scorched walls. Mallory pushed open the gate, which hung crooked on one hinge. Someone's been here recently, he muttered. The grass is trampled. Father Brown nodded. And that someone was in a hurry. See there, the ashes still glow. Behind the remains of the rectory stood a half-burned bonfire, its center smoldering red. Bits of paper fluttered in the breeze, some charred to black curls, others only half consumed. Father Brown stooped and picked one up carefully between thumb and forefinger. Mallory took out his notebook. "What is it?" The priest squinted at the edges. "Part of a letter. The handwriting's neat, almost clerical. But the ink's old. And look here, Inspector." He pointed to a line that had survived the flames, "The clock strikes at dawn." Mallory frowned. "Some sort of code? Or a promise?" Father Brown murmured. "Perhaps even a warning." They sifted through the ashes in silence. Several more fragments emerged, corners of envelopes, torn pages from a ledger, and one small metal clasp, melted and twisted. Father Brown turned it over in his hand thoughtfully. "That looks like something from an account book," Mallory said. "Indeed. Mr. Lacey kept the church accounts, didn't he?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because," said Father Brown softly, "if someone wanted to erase evidence of theft, burning the books would be a good place to start." Mallory's expression changed from skepticism to reluctant interest. "You're suggesting our caretaker wasn't as innocent as everyone thought?" Father Brown shook his head. "No, I'm suggesting he might have found something he wasn't meant to find." The inspector straightened, brushing soot from his coat. "Then the person who broke into the tower may have wanted to silence him," Father Brown finished. For a while, they stood in thoughtful quiet. Birds sang somewhere in the hedges. The distant sound of a cart clattered along the main road. The morning, despite the grim discovery, felt almost peaceful again, too peaceful for what Father Brown sensed beneath it. Mallory finally broke the silence. "Let's have a look around. If someone came here last night, they might have left something behind." They circled the ruins. Near the back wall, Father Brown noticed footprints in the soft earth, 2 sets, one larger than the other. The smaller prints stopped abruptly near the well, as though the person had turned and run. The larger ones led toward the woods. 2 people, Mallory observed. And they didn't leave together. The priest nodded. "I'd wager one was Mr. Lacey." Mallory looked puzzled. "How can you tell?" "These prints are uneven, see how the left heel sinks deeper? Mr. Lacey limped slightly after that fall he took last winter." Mallory scratched his chin. "You have an irritating habit of being right, Father." "It's not irritation, Inspector," Father Brown replied gently. "It's observation." They followed the larger prints a few yards into the trees. There, hidden behind a clump of ivy, lay a small wooden box, its lid half buried in mud. Mallory pried it open with his penknife. Inside were several coins, a tarnished silver cross, and a folded sheet of paper. The priest took the paper, unfolding it carefully. Mallory's eyes widened. "That's the church ledger. It went missing a month ago." Father Brown nodded. "Then Mr. Lacey must have found it, and someone tried to destroy it." They carried the box back toward the rectory ruins and examined the pages. Many were smudged, but one entry was still legible. It recorded a donation of £50 from Miss Clara Ventham, in memory of her late husband. Mallory looked up sharply. "Clara Ventham? The same woman who runs the inn?" "The very same," Father Brown said. "A generous soul, by all accounts." Mallory frowned. "But the donation never appeared in the church's public accounts. The vicar said the money never came." Father Brown's brow furrowed. Then the question becomes, if Miss Ventham gave the money, and the church never received it, where did it go? The inspector's eyes narrowed. Straight into Lacey's pocket, perhaps. Perhaps, Father Brown said thoughtfully, or perhaps into someone else's. Before Mallory could reply, a voice called from the path. Tom, the altar boy, came running toward them, his face flushed. Father. Inspector. There's a man at the church asking for you. Says his name's Bennett, a clockmaker from the next village. A clockmaker? Mallory asked. What does he want? Tom shook his head. He said it was about Mr. Lacey and the tower clock. He looked frightened. Father Brown exchanged a glance with the inspector. Then we'd best not keep him waiting. As they walked back toward the village, Father Brown's gaze drifted to the burnt paper in his hand. The clock strikes at dawn. A curious phrase, he thought. Mr. Lacey's body had been found just after sunrise. Had the line been literal, a meeting time? Or symbolic, a reference to guilt being revealed at the first light of day? When they reached the church again, the crowd had thinned, though a few villagers lingered, whispering in low voices. At the gate stood a tall, nervous man with a narrow face and ink-stained fingers. He clutched a small leather satchel to his chest. Mr. Bennett? Father Brown asked kindly. The man nodded. Yes, Father. I'm sorry to intrude. I came as soon as I heard the news. Mr. Lacey was one of my clients. I serviced the church clock for him. Mallory stepped forward. And what business brings you here now? Bennett hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. He asked me to meet him last night, said he had something important to show me in the tower. But when I arrived, the door was locked. I waited nearly an hour, then left. This morning, I heard he was dead. Father Brown's eyes softened. Did he tell you what it was about? Only that it concerned the clock mechanism, Bennett said. He mentioned something hidden behind the face, something that didn't belong there. Mallory's eyes hardened. Hidden? What, exactly? The clockmaker swallowed hard. A bag, Inspector. A small black bag. He said he'd found it lodged behind the gears. Father Brown looked at him steadily. And you never saw it yourself? Bennett shook his head. No. But he said he'd bring it down in the morning. His voice broke. Now I suppose he never had the chance. The priest turned toward the tower. Its narrow windows glinted in the sunlight like watchful eyes. Then, Father Brown said quietly, that is where we must look next. Mallory followed his gaze, his jaw set. And this time, Father, if there's anything up there, we'll find it. As they entered the church once more, the bell above them stirred faintly in the wind, though no rope moved, and no hand had touched it. It was as if the tower itself were whispering to them, reminding them that its secrets had not yet all been told. Chapter 3, The Black Bag in the Tower. The heavy door to the belfry creaked open once again, and dust rained down as Father Brown and Inspector Mallory stepped inside. The air was close, thick with the smell of old wood, oil, and the faint metallic tang of the clock's gears. Through the narrow slit of a window, sunlight streamed in thin, slanted beams that fell across the priest's round face and glinted off Mallory's brass buttons. Father Brown looked upward, following the chain of the bell rope to where it vanished into the dark. You say Mr. Lacey mentioned something hidden behind the face of the clock, he asked softly. Bennett, the clockmaker, nodded nervously from behind them. That's right. He said he found it wedged in the gear housing while winding the mechanism. I warned him not to tamper with the works until I arrived. Mallory shot him a look. And you expect us to believe that you had no idea what was in it? The man swallowed hard. I swear it, Inspector. I didn't touch it. I came here to tell you because I thought it might have something to do with his death. Father Brown's tone was calm but firm. You did the right thing, Mr. Bennet. He turned toward the narrow ladder that led upward. Now, if you'll permit me, I'd like to see this for myself. Careful, Mallory warned. That staircase looks ready to give way. I've climbed far less reliable ladders in my time, Father Brown replied with a faint smile. He gripped the rungs and began his ascent, moving slowly but steadily until he reached the wooden landing above the clockworks. The faint ticking of the mechanism filled the space, a deep, rhythmic sound, like the beating of a heart. Extraordinary, he murmured, running his fingers over the brass gears. Such order and precision, even after years of neglect. Machines are very honest creatures, Inspector, they only do what they're told. Pity people can't be the same, Mallory muttered from below. Father Brown leaned closer to the clock face, peering through a small panel. There, wedged behind one of the iron supports, was something dark, a crumpled shape caked in dust. He reached in carefully, fingers brushing against coarse fabric. I have it, he said softly, pulling free a small black bag, tied with a faded red ribbon. He set it gently on the floor beside him and untied the knot. Inside were several envelopes bound with string, a tarnished silver key, and a few folded sheets of paper. One of the envelopes bore the seal of the diocese, another was marked, Private, Vicar of Brambleford. Mallory climbed up to join him. Well, well, he said, squatting beside the priest. Looks like our friend Mr. Lacey was hiding church correspondence. Or protecting it, Father Brown corrected quietly. Let's see what was so important. He opened the first envelope with care. Inside was a letter written in a shaky but refined hand. Reverend, the donation was delivered in full as agreed. I trust it will be used to restore the rectory roof as promised. I will expect the accounts to reflect it by month's end. C.V. Mallory whistled softly. Clara Ventham again. So she really did pay. Father Brown nodded. And Mr. Lacey must have realized that the money never reached the church fund. He hid the letter, perhaps fearing someone would destroy it. The inspector flipped open the second sheet. This one's from the vicar himself, he said grimly. Dated 3 weeks later. Mr. Lacey, I must insist you leave this matter alone. The bishop has already reviewed the ledgers and is satisfied. Do not trouble Miss Ventham further. Remember your position. Mallory's eyes darkened. Sounds like a cover-up to me. Father Brown said nothing for a long moment. He simply studied the silver key, rolling it between his fingers. It was small, ornate, clearly not meant for a door. This may open a box rather than a lock, he mused. Perhaps even the collection safe. Bennet, still standing below, called up, What does it mean, Father? It means, the priest said, that Mr. Lacey stumbled upon deceit, and tried to keep proof of it safe. Mallory's jaw tightened. So you're saying the vicar's involved? I'm saying, Father Brown replied gently, that sin often hides in respectable clothing. Let's not judge too soon. They climbed down, the bag and its contents now sealed inside Mallory's satchel. Outside, the village seemed brighter than before, but that brightness felt deceptive, like light glinting off broken glass. Miss Clara Ventham stood by the church gate, a wide hat shielding her pale face. Her expression tightened as she saw them approach. "Inspector Mallory," she said briskly. "Father Brown. I heard the dreadful news about poor Mr. Lacey. Such a tragedy." "Indeed, Miss Ventham," Father Brown said kindly. "You knew him well?" "Oh, yes," she replied quickly. "He often came to the inn for tea. A quiet man, polite. Why, only last week he asked after some old receipts of mine. Something about a donation years ago. I told him I'd mislaid them." Mallory's eyes flickered. "Mislaid them? Or burned them?" Her gaze hardened. "What are you implying, Inspector?" "Only that Mr. Lacey's curiosity seems to have gotten him killed." Father Brown intervened gently. "Inspector, please. Miss Ventham, forgive his bluntness. We're simply trying to understand what happened." She looked at the priest, her voice trembling slightly. "You think someone killed him?" "I think," Father Brown said softly, "that he found something too heavy to carry alone." For a moment, her composure cracked. Then she straightened, lifting her chin. "If you'll excuse me, Father, I have guests to tend to." She turned sharply and walked away, her heels striking the cobblestones like hammers. Mallory watched her go. "She's hiding something." "Perhaps," said Father Brown, "but she's not the only one." The priest looked toward the vicarage, a tall, ivy-covered house at the edge of the village green. Its curtains were drawn tight, though a faint light glowed behind them. "Come," he said quietly. "It's time we spoke with the Reverend himself." Mallory groaned. "You think he'll just confess to stealing from the church?" "Confession," Father Brown said with a faint smile, "is the one thing most people try to avoid until their souls force it out of them." They reached the vicarage door. Father Brown knocked twice. After a pause, the door opened a few inches, revealing the pale, nervous face of Reverend Charles Denham. "Father Brown," he said with forced warmth. "Inspector Mallory. To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Father Brown removed his hat. "To a death, Reverend. And perhaps to something even more troubling." Denham's eyes flicked from the priest to the inspector and back. "Come in, then." Inside, the room smelled faintly of tobacco and candle wax. Papers lay scattered across the desk, and a half-empty glass of brandy sat beside a worn Bible. Father Brown took a seat quietly. Mallory remained standing. "Reverend," the priest began gently, "you knew Mr. Lacey well. Did he ever confide anything unusual to you before his death?" Denham hesitated. He was troubled, yes. Claimed he'd found inconsistencies in the accounts. I told him he was mistaken." Mallory crossed his arms. "You also told him to stop asking questions." "We found your letter." The vicar's face drained of color. You had no right." Father Brown leaned forward, his voice calm but steady. "We have every right when a man lies dead at the foot of your bell tower, Reverend. Please, tell us what you know." For a long moment, Denham said nothing. The clock on his mantel ticked loudly in the silence. Finally, he spoke, his voice trembling. "It wasn't me," he said. "I didn't take the money. But I know who did." Father Brown's gaze didn't waver. "Then you must tell us, before they take something else, perhaps even another life." The vicar lowered his head into his hands. "You don't understand," he whispered. "It's not just theft. It's far worse than that." Father Brown's eyes softened. "Then help us understand, my son." Outside, the church bell rang once, a single, hollow tone that echoed through the village like a warning. And in that moment, Father Brown knew the confession they were about to hear would reach far beyond money, into the very soul of Brambleford itself. Chapter 4: The Vicar's Secret. The sound of the church bell faded slowly, its echo lingering in the walls of the vicarage like a ghost reluctant to leave. Reverend Denham sat hunched in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together, the knuckles white. Father Brown waited patiently, his calm eyes fixed on the man's trembling face, while Inspector Mallory paced the rug in slow, deliberate steps. Finally, Denham broke the silence. "You must understand, Father, I never meant for any of this to happen." "I don't think you did," said Father Brown gently. "But something did happen. And until you tell us the truth, more harm may follow." The vicar nodded weakly. He rose and walked to the window, staring out at the churchyard where the villagers still gathered in small, uneasy clusters. "It began 6 months ago," he said quietly. "The church was in debt. Attendance had fallen, donations were scarce. I was desperate to keep the parish afloat." He turned back toward them, his eyes red-rimmed. "Then Miss Clara Ventham offered her donation, £50. She said it was in memory of her late husband. A blessing, I thought. I asked Mr. Lacey to record it and deposit it in the parish account." "And he didn't?" Mallory asked sharply. "Oh, he did," Denham said bitterly. "But before the money ever reached the bank, it was stolen. The envelope disappeared from his desk overnight." He was distraught. He came to me the next morning in tears, saying he'd failed the church. Father Brown tilted his head. "And what did you do?" "I comforted him. Told him not to blame himself. But when the bishop's audit approached, I panicked. I feared scandal, that I'd be accused of negligence. So I altered the records, erased the entry, and told the diocese the donation never arrived." Mallory's eyes hardened. "You falsified church accounts to hide a theft?" "Yes," Denham said, his voice breaking. "I thought I could protect the church's reputation. But Mr. Lacey refused to stay silent. He said the truth mattered more than pride." Father Brown's gaze softened. "A man of conscience, then?" "Yes," the vicar whispered. "But someone else knew about it, someone who had taken the money. I don't know who, but Mr. Lacey believed he was close to finding out." "Did he say how?" "He only said he'd found something in the bell tower that would prove it." Denham's hands shook. "He was frightened, Father. He said he was being followed." Mallory frowned. "Followed by whom?" "I don't know. But that very night, I saw a light in the tower. I thought he'd gone to pray. I never imagined," his voice trailed off. Father Brown nodded slowly. "You didn't kill him, Reverend. But you feared what his discovery might reveal." Denham sank back into his chair, covering his face. "Yes. I feared the truth. And now he's dead because of my cowardice." Father Brown placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Not cowardice, confusion. We all mistake silence for peace, but silence can hide evil more easily than words." Mallory folded his arms. "So we know the motive, someone wanted to keep that donation hidden. But who had access to the church at night?" "Only Mr. Lacey, myself," Denham said, "and Miss Ventham. She often brought food for the charity drives and knew where the spare key was kept." Mallory's eyes narrowed. "Ventham again. Always the helpful benefactor." Father Brown rose and walked slowly toward the door. "Inspector, I think we need to visit the inn once more." The King's Arms sat on the corner of Brambleford Square, its sign creaking faintly in the wind. Inside, the smell of roasted meat mingled with ale and pipe smoke. Miss Clara Ventham stood behind the counter, speaking quietly with a guest, but her face stiffened when she saw the two men enter. "Back again, gentlemen," she said coolly. "You must be very fond of my establishment." Mallory showed his badge. "Fondness has nothing to do with it. We've come to ask a few more questions." Father Brown smiled mildly. "Purely in the interest of clarity, my dear." She folded her arms. "Then ask what you must." Mallory leaned on the counter. "You said you've mislaid the receipt for your donation. Yet we've found a letter from you confirming payment. Care to explain?" Her eyes flickered briefly, the first sign of unease. "That letter was old. I'd forgotten about it." Father Brown's tone remained kind but probing. "You seemed very eager to see the church roof repaired. Did you ever inquire why the work never began?" She hesitated. "Mr. Denham said the funds were insufficient. I trusted him." "Trust is a fine thing," Father Brown said softly. "But it's often misplaced. Tell me, Miss Ventham, who else knew about that donation?" She looked away. "No one, except perhaps my brother. He helped with my accounts." Mallory straightened. "Your brother? He lives in Brambleford? Just outside the village?" "Samuel Ventham. He's not fond of visitors." The inspector exchanged a sharp glance with Father Brown. "And what does your brother do?" She sighed. "He handles estate matters. He's a solicitor of sorts, though not a very successful one." Father Brown's expression deepened into quiet reflection. A solicitor who knows church finance, and a sister who donates money that disappears before reaching its mark. Mallory smirked. "Sounds like we've found our man." "Perhaps," Father Brown said, "but guilt rarely wears only one face. We should see Mr. Ventham ourselves." The Ventham estate stood a mile from the village, an aging brick house half swallowed by ivy, its windows dim and the garden wild with neglect. A single lamp glowed in the drawing room, casting long shadows across the gravel path. Mallory knocked firmly. After a moment, the door opened a crack, revealing a thin man with slicked hair and sharp eyes. "Yes? Samuel Ventham? Who's asking?" "Inspector Mallory, Scotland Yard. And this is Father Brown." The man's expression tightened. "Ah. The priest who pokes about where he shouldn't." Father Brown smiled mildly. "And the solicitor who's rather hard to find, it seems." "State your business." "It concerns the late Mr. Lacey," Mallory said. "We understand you might have had dealings with him." Ventham's jaw twitched. "I don't know what you're implying, but I've done nothing wrong." "Funny," Mallory said, "we hadn't accused you of anything yet." Father Brown stepped forward, his eyes kind but penetrating. "Mr. Ventham, the truth always arrives sooner or later, much like the dawn. And when it does, it's best to face it on your own feet rather than be dragged into it." The man sneered. "You talk in riddles, Father." "Not riddles," said Father Brown softly. "Warnings. I believe you know what was in the bag behind the church clock." For a moment, silence. Then Samuel Ventham's composure cracked. His fingers tightened on the doorframe. "You found it?" Mallory's voice was sharp. "So there was something to find." Ventham turned pale. You don't understand. I only meant to borrow it. The money was supposed to be temporary. I was going to return it once the investment paid off. Investment? Father Brown repeated quietly. He nodded miserably. A scheme, a land parcel near Oxford. Promised double returns in a month. It collapsed overnight. I panicked. Clara didn't know. I couldn't tell her. And Mr. Lacey? Mallory demanded. He discovered the missing funds. Confronted me last week. I begged him for time, but he threatened to go to the bishop. I didn't mean for him to die. Father Brown's tone was calm but sorrowful. But you were there that night, weren't you? Bentham's eyes widened. Yes, but I swear I left before dawn. He was alive when I went up the tower. I heard him ringing the bell. I never touched him. Mallory slammed his notebook shut. You'll tell the rest of that story at the station. But Father Brown's gaze didn't leave the man's face. I believe you didn't kill him, he said quietly. But you're hiding something else, something far darker than greed. Bentham swallowed hard. What do you mean? Because, Father Brown said softly, you're afraid not of justice, but of someone else. The man's lips trembled. He looked toward the window, where the last light of evening glowed red. You don't know what you're dealing with, Father. The man who came after Lacey, he's still here in Brambleford. Father Brown's eyes narrowed slightly. Then, my son, we must find him before nightfall. Chapter 5, The Man in the Shadows. Night settled over Brambleford like a heavy cloak. The lamplighter had long finished his rounds, and the narrow streets glowed dimly beneath wavering pools of light. A soft wind stirred the trees, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked once, then fell silent. In the vicarage drawing room, Inspector Mallory stood by the window, watching the fog drift through the churchyard. Father Brown sat nearby, turning the silver key they had found in the black bag between his fingers. The rhythmic ticking of the mantel clock filled the silence between them. So, Mallory said at last, Bentham's our thief. He admits to stealing the donation. Claims he only meant to borrow it. But he swears he didn't kill Lacey. Father Brown nodded. I believe him. Mallory turned sharply. You believe him? He had motive, opportunity, and the nerve to lie for weeks. Yes, said Father Brown, but not the spirit for murder. His guilt is one of weakness, not violence. He's afraid, not of the law, but of someone who holds power over him. Mallory frowned. You think someone else is pulling the strings? I think, Father Brown replied quietly, there's another shadow in this story, one we haven't yet seen clearly. The inspector grunted. Fine. Let's say you're right. Who in this sleepy village could terrify a solicitor into silence? Father Brown looked thoughtfully toward the church tower visible through the fog. The answer may lie there. Mr. Lacey was frightened enough to climb into that tower before dawn. He thought it was the one place he could hide what he'd found. But he was wrong. Mallory folded his arms. Then we need to know who went after him. At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. Mallory opened it to find young Tom, the altar boy, pale and out of breath. Father Brown, he gasped. There's someone in the church. Mallory's hand went to his revolver. Who? I don't know, sir. I saw a lantern moving near the altar. I thought everyone had gone home. Father Brown rose at once, his expression grave but calm. Then we mustn't keep our visitor waiting. The church loomed dark against the sky as they approached, its spire vanishing into the fog. The main doors stood ajar, and a faint flicker of light danced inside. Mallory motioned for Tom to stay back, then entered with Father Brown close behind. The air was cold and thick with the scent of candle wax and dust. Their footsteps echoed softly against the stone floor. At the far end of the nave, near the altar, a lantern swayed gently, as if someone had set it down only moments before. Mallory lifted the light. "No one here." "Not yet," Father Brown murmured. "But they'll return for what they came to find." He walked slowly toward the pulpit, his gaze sweeping the shadows. The wooden pews stretched out like rows of silent witnesses. Then, just as Mallory turned to speak, a faint creak came from above, from the narrow gallery near the organ loft. Mallory drew his revolver. "Stay here, Father." "Inspector," Father Brown said softly, "be careful. Whoever killed Mr. Lacey may be desperate enough to kill again." Mallory climbed the stairs two at a time, the boards groaning under his weight. The priest followed at a slower pace, his small figure swallowed by the dark. When they reached the gallery, the lantern below threw long shadows across the rafters. Something shifted behind the organ, a figure trying not to be seen. "Come out," Mallory barked. For a moment, silence. Then a man stepped into the light, tall, broad-shouldered, with a coarse face and soot-black hands. He wore a worker's coat, his boots muddy, his eyes darting between them like a trapped animal. Father Brown recognized him at once. "Mr. Crane," he said quietly. "The bell ringer." The man glared at him. "Didn't think anyone would notice me, did you, Father?" "I notice everyone," Father Brown said kindly. "That's my job." Mallory's gun didn't waver. "What are you doing here?" Crane sneered. "Same as you, looking for answers. Only I already know them." "Then perhaps you'll enlighten us," said Father Brown. The man's voice grew rough. "Lacey got what was coming. Always poking about in other men's business. Couldn't leave things be." Father Brown's tone stayed gentle. "You killed him, then?" Crane's jaw tightened. "He shouldn't have gone up that tower. I warned him." Mallory took a step forward. "Warned him about what?" Crane's eyes flicked toward the dark ceiling, then back at them. "About secrets best left buried." Father Brown moved closer, his calm presence somehow more pressing than the gun. "Secrets like stolen money? Or something more?" The man's breath came quick and heavy. "You don't understand. He was going to expose all of us, the vicar, Ventham, even me. He said the tower held proof." "And so you followed him there," said Father Brown softly. "You argued. Perhaps you struggled." "I didn't push him." Crane snapped. "I swear it. We fought, yes." He tripped, fell down the steps. "By the time I got to him, it was too late." Mallory's voice was hard. "You expect us to believe that?" "It's the truth." Crane shouted. "I wanted to scare him, not kill him. He was going to ruin everything." Father Brown looked at him steadily. "And what was everything, Mr. Crane?" The man hesitated. Then, with a bitter laugh, he said, "You really don't know, do you, priest? The donation, the books, the missing money, that was only the start. The real business wasn't in the accounts. It was under the church." "Under?" Mallory echoed. Crane nodded grimly. "Old tunnels from before the Reformation. Smugglers used them centuries ago. Denham found them last year. Said he'd seal them off. But he didn't. Ventham and we used them to move things, wine, antiques, anything we could sell without questions. Mallory's eyes widened. You were running a smuggling ring from the church? Crane's face twisted. We were desperate. The village is dying, Inspector. No work, no money. I did what I had to. Father Brown's voice dropped to a whisper. And Mr. Lacey found out. Crane nodded miserably. He said he'd tell the bishop. I begged him to keep quiet. He wouldn't listen. I didn't mean to kill him. God help me, I didn't mean to. Father Brown closed his eyes briefly, as though offering a silent prayer. When he spoke, his tone was almost sorrowful. The truth, my son, is a bell that always rings, even when men try to silence it. Mallory lowered his gun. You'll have plenty of time to think about that where you're going. But Crane wasn't finished. His eyes darted toward the window, where the fog pressed like a wall. You think it's over? You don't know half of it. Someone else was there that night, someone who told me to keep my mouth shut. Said if I spoke, I'd hang. Mallory's hand tightened on the revolver. Who? Crane hesitated, sweat beading on his brow. The man behind all of it, the one who gave the orders. The one you'd least suspect. Before either of them could speak again, a sound echoed from below, the slam of the church door, followed by footsteps retreating fast into the fog. Mallory cursed and rushed to the window. Someone's running. Father Brown's gaze followed the sound, his expression calm but knowing. Let him run, Inspector, he said softly. He won't get far. A guilty conscience always circles back to where it began. Crane sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands. The lantern's light flickered across the pews, casting long, quivering shadows across the church floor. Father Brown turned toward the door, his voice low but steady. Come, Inspector. The hour grows late, and the truth waits for us in the dark. Chapter 6, The Chase Through the Fog. The moment the church door slammed, the stillness of Brambleford shattered like glass. Mallory bolted down the spiral stairs, his boots echoing through the nave. Father Brown followed, slower but purposeful, his cassock brushing against the stone as he descended. Outside, the fog had thickened to a ghostly white wall, swallowing the village in silence. Mallory drew his revolver as they burst into the churchyard. He can't have gone far, he hissed, scanning the mist. Not far, Father Brown said quietly. But he'll choose the shadows over the light. They always do. They heard it then, the crunch of hurried footsteps along the gravel path leading toward the woods. Mallory darted forward, the beam of his lantern slicing through the fog. Father Brown followed at his own pace, his umbrella tapping softly against the ground. The inspector's voice rang out. Stop! In the name of the law. No answer, only the faint crackle of twigs underfoot. The chase led them past the old rectory ruins, now nothing more than blackened walls looming like teeth in the mist. The lantern light flickered across the broken stones and the glint of wet leaves. Then, ahead of them, the shadow of a man darted between the trees. There! Mallory barked, and the two men plunged into the woods. Branches clawed at their coats, roots snagged their boots. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. Father Brown, though slower, moved with surprising steadiness, guided not by sight but by instinct. He's heading toward the stream, he murmured. It's the only place the ground stays soft enough to hide footprints. Mallory grunted. You'd make a fine constable, Father. Not at all, the priest said mildly. I only know how guilty men think. They broke through the trees and reached the stream's edge. The lanternlight revealed footprints in the mud, deep, fresh, and hurried, leading across the narrow bridge toward the meadows. Mallory cursed softly. We'll lose him in that fog. Then we mustn't chase him, Father Brown said. We must think like him. He stopped and knelt, tracing a boot print with his finger. He's running toward the mill road. But he won't reach it. He'll turn back. Back? Yes. To the one place he feels safe, the vicarage. Mallory's eyes widened. The vicarage? Are you saying? But Father Brown was already turning back the way they'd come. Hurry, Inspector. If I'm right, the man behind all this will be waiting there. They reached the vicarage 10 minutes later, breathless and soaked with mist. The house stood dark except for a single lamp burning faintly in the study window. Mallory motioned to Father Brown to stay behind him, then pushed the door open. It creaked softly, revealing the vicarage interior just as they'd left it earlier, papers scattered across the desk, the smell of brandy still lingering in the air. But now, another smell mingled with it, gun oil. Father Brown's eyes narrowed. He's here. A shadow moved in the corner. Then, from behind the curtain, Reverend Denham stepped forward, pale but composed, a revolver trembling in his hand. Mallory froze. Put it down, Reverend. Denham's voice was quiet, almost sorrowful. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Father Brown took a cautious step closer. So it was you who ran from the church. The vicar nodded faintly. I couldn't let him speak. Crane would have told you everything, about the tunnels, the money, all of it. I was trying to protect the parish. Mallory's eyes blazed. By covering up theft? By letting a man die? Denham's hand shook, but his tone hardened. You don't understand, Inspector. The church would have been ruined. My entire life's work, gone. I tried to save it, not destroy it. Father Brown spoke softly, almost tenderly. And Mr. Lacey? Did you try to save him too? The vicar's eyes darted toward the floor. He wouldn't listen. He came to me that night, saying he'd take the evidence to the bishop. I begged him to stop. We argued, and then he ran toward the tower. I followed him. He slipped, I swear he slipped. Father Brown's gaze was steady. You mean you didn't push him? No. Denham's voice cracked. But when I saw him fall, when I saw what I'd caused, I panicked. I broke the lock to make it look like a burglary. I thought if the truth stayed buried, the village could be spared the shame. Mallory stepped closer, lowering his gun slightly. You've done a fine job sparing them. One man dead, another in jail, and a parish on the edge of ruin. Denham's shoulders sagged. Perhaps you're right. But what would you have done in my place? I'd have told the truth, Mallory said flatly. Father Brown shook his head gently. No, Inspector. You'd have arrested it. I would have forgiven it. Mallory shot him a look, but Father Brown stepped forward until he stood just before the trembling vicar. Charles, he said softly, you've spent your life preaching salvation. But you've mistaken pride for piety. You thought saving the church meant hiding its sins. God doesn't need walls of stone to protect him. Only the truth. For a long moment, Denham said nothing. Then his hand slowly lowered, the revolver falling to the carpet with a soft thud. "You're right," he whispered. "I couldn't bear to see it all fall apart." Father Brown laid a hand on his shoulder. "It's already fallen, my son. All that remains is to rebuild, honestly this time." Mallory picked up the weapon and exhaled. "You'll have to make your confession in court, Reverend." "I know," Denham murmured. "But perhaps I can still make one in church first." By dawn, the fog began to lift. The sun crept over the hills, painting the village in pale gold. A small crowd gathered in the churchyard, silent, solemn. Reverend Denham, pale and weary, stood before them, flanked by Father Brown and Inspector Mallory. He cleared his throat. "My friends," he began, "I have sinned. I sought to hide wrongs done in this parish, believing I could protect our name. But by hiding sin, I gave it room to grow. A good man died because I lacked the courage to face the light. For that, I ask forgiveness, from God, and from you." The villagers exchanged glances, shock, sorrow, disbelief. Then old Mrs. Merton, the baker's wife, stepped forward and placed a trembling hand on his arm. "We forgive you, Reverend," she said softly. "We all do." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mallory, standing beside Father Brown, muttered, "You'd never see this in London." Father Brown smiled faintly. "Sin in the city hides in crowds. Here, it hides in hearts. Easier to find, but harder to forgive." As the people began to disperse, the priest walked toward the tower. The morning light struck the bell, gleaming faintly through the dust. He looked up at it and whispered a short prayer. When he turned back, Mallory was watching him curiously. "You think it's over?" the inspector asked. Father Brown looked thoughtful. "Evil rarely ends, Inspector. It only changes its disguise. But for now," he said, smiling softly, "I think Brambleford has heard enough bells for one lifetime." The churchyard was quiet again, peaceful, almost as if the tragedy had been absorbed into the soil. The crows circled once more above the steeple, but their cries sounded less like warnings now and more like farewells. Father Brown took one last look at the tower, then turned toward the sunrise, the hem of his cassock brushing the grass. For the first time in many days, the village of Brambleford felt alive again, not free from sin, perhaps, but washed clean by truth. Chapter 7, The Trial of Reverend Denham. 2 weeks later, the small courthouse at Market Wexford was crowded beyond measure. Farmers, shopkeepers, and parishioners from Brambleford packed the gallery benches, whispering behind their hands as Reverend Charles Denham stood before the magistrate. His clerical collar was gone, in its place, a simple grey coat and the air of a man carrying more than one burden. Father Brown sat quietly in the second row, his hat in his lap, eyes lowered in thought. Beside him, Inspector Mallory leaned back with his arms crossed, scanning the courtroom with restless impatience. "Never thought I'd see a vicar in the dock," Mallory muttered. Father Brown gave a faint sigh. "Sometimes the man who tends the flock is the first to lose his way. But I don't think this story is finished yet." Mallory frowned. "Finished?" "He confessed, Father. He admitted to hiding the theft, covering up the death, even tampering with the evidence. What more is there?" Father Brown didn't answer. His gaze was fixed not on the vicar, but on a familiar figure sitting quietly at the back of the room, Miss Clara Ventham. Her gloved hands were folded neatly in her lap, but her eyes never once left the man on trial. The clerk called for silence, and the magistrate began to read the charges. "Reverend Charles Denham, you stand accused of obstruction of justice, falsification of church records, and perjury. How do you plead?" Denham's voice was steady but weary. "Guilty to all, your worship." A murmur spread through the gallery. The magistrate nodded gravely. "We will hear the statements before sentencing. Inspector Mallory, present the findings." Mallory stood, his tone brisk and factual. "The defendant admits to concealing a theft of £50 from a church donation given by Miss Clara Ventham. Evidence shows that the church caretaker, Mr. Lacey, discovered the theft and was subsequently found dead after falling from the belfry. The Reverend Denham falsified records to prevent discovery of the loss and later disguised the death as accidental." He paused, glancing toward the priest. "However, it has not been proven that he caused Mr. Lacey's fall." The magistrate turned to Father Brown. "I understand you were involved in the investigation, Father. Do you have anything to add?" Father Brown rose slowly, his small figure seeming somehow to command the room. "Only a few thoughts, your worship. Reverend Denham has confessed to grave errors, of pride, of concealment, of fear. But I believe another crime remains hidden." Mallory turned toward him, startled. "Father." "Let me explain," Brown continued calmly. "We have assumed that the Reverend found Mr. Lacey already dead at the foot of the stairs, and that he merely disguised the scene to protect his parish. But the facts tell a quieter, different story, one no one has yet listened to." The magistrate leaned forward. "Go on." Father Brown clasped his hands behind his back. "When I first examined Mr. Lacey's body, I noticed something strange. His right sleeve was torn, not from the fall, but by a sharp edge. And the torn thread smelled faintly of oil. At the time, I thought it came from the clock machinery. But now I believe it came from something else, something metallic, smaller, and more deliberate." Mallory frowned. "You mean a weapon?" "No," said Father Brown softly. "A tool." He turned toward the gallery, his eyes resting on Miss Ventham. "Perhaps you would join us, my dear." Gasps rippled through the room as all eyes turned to her. Clara Ventham rose stiffly, color draining from her cheeks. "What do you mean, Father?" Father Brown's voice was gentle, almost pitying. "You visited the church that night, didn't you? You said you wished to pray for your late husband, but you went to confront Mr. Lacey instead." She shook her head, trembling. "That's not true." He continued as if he hadn't heard her. "Your brother told us he stole the donation to invest in land. But I've seen your accounts. The funds never left your name. You never gave them to him. It was you who took them back, after realizing he'd forged your signature on the church papers." Mallory blinked. "Wait, are you saying she?" Father Brown nodded. "Miss Ventham discovered her brother's deception and planned to expose him. But Mr. Lacey learned of her visit and went to the church early to protect the records. When she arrived, she found him at the tower, arguing with her brother. And in her anger, or fear, she struck out." Clara's composure broke. "No," she cried. "I didn't mean to. He grabbed my wrist, I only pushed him away." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Father Brown's tone remained calm. "He lost his balance on the stairs and fell. You panicked. Samuel begged you to keep silent. And when the Reverend later discovered the truth, he chose to share your silence rather than bring scandal to his parish." Tears streamed down Clara's face. "I tried to stop it all. I went to burn the letters in the rectory, to destroy anything that could hurt the church. But it only made things worse. The magistrate banged his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" Mallory rose slowly, his expression grim. "Miss Ventham, I'm afraid you'll need to come with me." She turned to Father Brown, her voice breaking. "I prayed for forgiveness every night. Does God forgive a moment's madness?" Father Brown looked at her kindly, his voice barely above a whisper. "He forgives everything, my dear, except the refusal to be forgiven." Outside, the courthouse steps were bathed in pale sunlight. The villagers left in silence, their whispers subdued, their hearts heavy with the weight of revelation. Mallory stood beside Father Brown, watching as Clara Ventham was led away in the inspector's carriage. "Well," he muttered, "you were right again. Never simple, is it?" "No," Father Brown said softly. "Truth rarely is. It hides behind our virtues as easily as our vices." Mallory lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. "And Denham?" "He'll serve his sentence," the priest replied. "But I think his real punishment is over. Sometimes living with what one's done is penance enough." They stood for a moment, watching the carriage disappear down the cobbled street. Then Father Brown turned to Mallory with a small smile. "Do you hear that, Inspector?" Mallory frowned. "Hear what?" "The bell," Father Brown said. Far off in the distance, St. Agnes's bell chimed softly, its sound faint but clear, carried on the morning breeze. Mallory shook his head. "That bell's been silent since the night of the murder." Father Brown's eyes twinkled. Perhaps it was time it spoke again. That evening, as the sun set over Brambleford, Father Brown walked alone through the churchyard. The graves glowed faintly in the golden light, and the tower stood still and silent once more. He paused beneath it, looking up at the bell that had tolled for so many souls, and now, perhaps, for its own. "Rest now, Mr. Lacey," he murmured. "The truth has rung at last." A soft breeze stirred his cassock as he turned and walked away, the sound of his steps fading into the peace of the evening. But somewhere beyond the hills, the faint echo of the bell lingered, not as a warning this time, but as a benediction. Chapter 8, The Bell of Forgiveness. A week after the trial, the village of Brambleford began to return to its gentle rhythm, or tried to. The bakery once again smelled of warm loaves each morning. The postman made his rounds with a smile, though quieter than before. The fields shimmered with spring rain. Yet beneath the calm, an ache lingered, the ache of knowing that goodness had faltered in familiar faces. Father Brown walked through the churchyard at dawn, his umbrella hooked over his arm, his steps soft against the wet grass. Above him, the bell tower loomed against a sky streaked with pink and gray. The bell itself, that mute witness to so many secrets, hung still, untouched since the day of Reverend Denham's confession. The priest paused beneath it, looking up. "It's time," he said softly. That afternoon, he gathered the villagers at St. Agnes Church. Mrs. Merton, the baker's wife, sat in the front pew, her hands folded over her apron. Tom, the altar boy, fidgeted nervously beside her. Even Inspector Mallory had returned, though he claimed it was purely for official business. Father Brown climbed to the pulpit, his voice calm but steady. "My friends," he began, "the bell above us has been silent for many weeks, perhaps too silent. We let it rest because its last toll marked tragedy. But bells, like people, are not meant to stay silent forever. They exist to call us, sometimes to worship, sometimes to warning, but always toward truth." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the congregation. "We've seen what happens when truth is hidden, how fear can twist even good men. Mr. Lacey sought honesty and paid dearly for it. Reverend Denham tried to protect his parish and nearly lost his soul. Miss Ventham let guilt burn her heart to ashes. Yet even now, God's mercy stands, waiting. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, it's the courage to start again. The villagers sat in quiet reflection. Mallory shifted uneasily, unused to such softness in the wake of a crime. When the service ended, Father Brown remained behind. The late afternoon light slanted through the stained glass, spilling colors across the pews. He climbed the spiral stairs to the belfry one last time. Dust motes swirled in the golden air as he reached the platform and laid a hand on the great bronze bell. It was cold under his fingers, yet it seemed to thrum faintly, as though waiting for permission. He smiled faintly. "You've kept too many secrets, old friend," he whispered. "Time to speak again." He grasped the rope and pulled. The bell's deep voice rolled through the air, low and solemn, spreading across Brambleford like a sigh. Windows opened. People stopped in the square, listening. For the first time since the tragedy, the sound didn't bring sorrow, it brought stillness. Below, Mrs. Merton wiped her eyes. Tom crossed himself. Even Inspector Mallory looked up from his paperwork at the inn, muttering, "Well, I'll be damned," before taking off his hat in respect. Later that evening, Father Brown walked toward the vicarage. It stood empty now, awaiting the new curate. The garden was overgrown, the curtains drawn. He stepped through the gate and looked toward the small bench under the apple tree where he and Denham had once shared tea and laughter before all this began. He sat down, folding his hands in his lap. "Strange thing, guilt," he murmured aloud. "It makes men hide in the very places where light would help them most." A rustle of steps approached, and Mallory appeared, hands shoved in his coat pockets. "You're talking to yourself again, Father," he said dryly. "Not at all," Father Brown replied cheerfully. "I'm talking to the trees. They listen better than most people." Mallory gave a tired half-smile and sat beside him. "Well, the town seems quieter now. You've done your work." "It's not my work," said the priest. "It's his. I merely tidy up afterward." The inspector chuckled. "I'll never understand how you can forgive people so easily." Father Brown looked at him. "Oh, I don't forgive easily. I forgive because it's necessary. Without it, we'd all drown in our own reflections." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky fade to purple. Mallory broke it first. "What will happen to Denham?" "He'll serve his time," Father Brown said softly. "But I've written to the bishop. When he's released, he'll be offered a position far from here, a quiet parish by the sea. I think he'll do good there." Mallory nodded slowly. "And Clara Ventham? She'll find her peace, in time. Remorse is heavy, but it's also a kind of grace. The soul that feels pain still lives." The inspector sighed. "You really believe people can change?" Father Brown smiled. "I believe people must change. Otherwise, all our sorrow is wasted." Mallory leaned back, looking at the darkening church tower. "You know, Father, for all your sermons, you'd make a fine detective. And you," Father Brown said with a chuckle, "would make a fine theologian, if you'd only stop interrupting your prayers with evidence." They both laughed quietly, the sound mingling with the chirp of crickets in the grass. As night settled fully over Brambleford, the church bell rang once more, not for death or mourning, but for the Angelus. Its tone was softer now, as though the weight of its burden had lifted. Inside the church, Father Brown lit a single candle at the altar. Its flame flickered gently, reflecting in the polished brass of the candlestick. He bowed his head. "Forgive us, Lord," he whispered, "for hiding truth behind fear. Forgive us for loving reputation more than honesty. And thank you for giving us one more dawn to do better." The candlelight trembled, casting his small shadow onto the wall, a simple silhouette of a man who had once again seen the darkness and chosen to walk through it toward grace. Outside, Brambleford slept in peace. The bell tower stood tall against the stars, its voice now quiet but ready. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of laughter drifted from the inn, cautious, but real. Life was returning. And Father Brown, walking home beneath the starlight, carried that sound with him like a prayer answered. He turned once more toward the tower, and for a moment, he thought he saw the shape of Mr. Lacey standing there, smiling faintly in the glow of the moon. He tipped his hat. "Rest easy, my friend," he murmured. "Your truth set us free." Then, with the peace of a man who had seen sin and still believed in goodness, Father Brown disappeared down the misty lane, a small, round figure beneath a vast and forgiving sky. The bell gave one final toll, soft and deep, as if blessing him on his way.